Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And I'm your co-host, Rich Geer, with you, and we are here really to address a couple of basic questions, right, tonight, Doug?
I'm taking from this book that I've been reading called Rock Solid Answers. It's edited by Mike Ord and John Reed from the Creation Research Society. This book has a lot of authors. It's sort of an anthology of different authors that they've put together, these different, and each of them are addressing a different question concerning flood geology.
Well, I'm assuming that three of the questions we started out with here are going to be answered in this book. Is that correct? Michael Ord is quite a guy. He's a meteorologist originally, or I mean, but he's written a number of books. He's known as the Ice Age guy. Really, he's the one that really began to open my eyes to the fact that the Ice Age is not the enemy of creationists. In fact, in a lot of respects, many things which have been co-opted by the evolutionists over the years are really, in point of fact, friends to the creation worldview. And the Ice Age is one of those. And Michael Ord is very well known for a lot of books dealing with that subject. So he's got one here about certain questions that come up dealing with a worldwide flood. And why don't we start with that first one, Doug, okay?
And the one about Mount Everest just seems sort of dated to me because it's sort of like the idea that when the flood occurred, it sort of rose up like a bathtub and filled up the entire surface of the earth up and covered it up over Mount Everest, and then it sort of drained back off like this. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that actually a number of people in the past have stumbled over. And here's one quote from a fellow that his name is Bernard Ram. He published this in 1954.
Well, yeah, back in those days they were still arguing about some of that stuff, you know? Yeah, 54.
And he said there is a problem of the amount of water required by a universal flood. All the waters of the heavens poured out all over the earth would amount to a sheath 7 inches thick. If the earth would be a perfect sphere so that all the waters of the ocean covered it, the depth of the ocean would be 2.5 to 3 miles. To cover the highest mountains would require 8 times more water than we now have. It would have involved a great creation of water to have covered the entire globe, but no such creative act is hinted at in the scriptures.
Oh boy, yeah. Do people really still offer that up as an objection to the worldwide flood today? I mean, creationists have done a yeoman's work, Doug, in the last 50, since the Genesis flood on down. That was written in 61 by Morris and Whitcomb. And since then, there have been many, many studies and apologetic and good answers to that whole it's a straw man argument to me now. Because the reality is, we were talking about this, most people don't even believe the mountains were, Everest probably wasn't even there. At least mountains, if they were there, were much lower. The scripture gives some indication of that, actually, in Psalms 104, I think, where he talks about the flood. Yeah, why don't you read that?
Verses 6 through 9, it says, you, in other words, God, covered the earth with deep as with a garment. The waters were standing above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they hurried away. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place where you established for them.
Right, and most, I would say, modern creationists really don't believe that let's, for instance, like the Marianas Trenches, as deep as they are, the volcanism that would have happened. It was not some tranquil flood like they talk about in the late 1700s. It was a very violent fountains of the deep breaking up. And in fact, there's some evidence that there were waters that maybe acted as somewhat like buffers or insulators for the shifting plates that were created in there. The point of it is that when a lot of the water didn't even come from rainfall, it came from the fountains of the deep breaking up. That's a lot of people believe that. And in the process of subduction and plate tectonic activity and continental sprint, whatever theory, things rose up, mountains buckled and got pushed higher. And at the same token, it's kind of like taking a sheet of paper over a rough surface. It goes, if you could go, it'll go up. but if you can also there's plasticity in the ocean, it would have gone down as well. So the oceans would not have nearly been as high. I think the more objective to me is the idea is what would it be like on top of the water? What would the atmosphere have been like if even at 10,000 feet, if you're at the top of them? And I don't know, I don't have an answer to that. You know what I'm saying, Doug? Some people object that air would have been thin or rarefied. Yeah.
If you have water rising up, it's going to push the atmosphere up with
That's what I'm thinking, yeah, okay, but
so that's not a problem. But Michael Ord is more of a vertical tectonics person than he is catastrophic plate tectonics.
Right.
So you have one plate going up over the other. He's more has the idea in many places the mountains rose kind of like this, where it tilted up.
Right.
And the mountains rose up, the valleys sank down,
right,
as the scripture says. And he has documented a number of places like in the West, where you have that scenario, where you have mountain ranges tilted up, and the valley that corresponds to that,
right,
down to the other side.
And of course, the idea of the
Whitney would be one case, and near Death Valley.
Is that right? Okay, yeah. But you have I guess the thing was you see a lot of the foldings and things like that, and there. But he's talking about in the overall plates would have been going like this. What's happening? Is that something they were going like this rather than like this, or what?
Yes, he thinks that, and actually the oceans and the continents, he thinks was much like that as well, where they shifted like that.
Really? Okay.
And so he's, like he says, he's 60 to 90% sure that that's the way it is.
Wow, okay.
But he says he doesn't hold fast to his own theory. Because,
well, tomorrow another theory comes up.
Do the time machine backwards and
to see.
And to figure out what it actually did happen. And so you can only speculate what was in the past, but what you find in the present.
But the thing about it is that we're not telling you that this is this explanation or that explanation, but there are reasonable explanations for how you could have had a flood covering the whole world without causing all these problems. And one of them, of course, is we don't believe the mountains were as tall as they were today, nor the valleys and the oceans as deep as they are today. However that occurs, and so
this Mount Everest problem would just basically.
Yeah, it would be pretty. Yeah, it's really, and it's an old argument. Like you say, it's 60. Bernard Rand was right, and that's 61 years ago. You said 54.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and so that's or 60 or 50, 59.
There were a lot of people who stumbled over that in the last century. Back in the early 1900s, and maybe back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why Lyell and his cohorts proposed their geological theory was that they were trying to figure this particular issue out, and they couldn't come up with a scenario that made sense to them. So,
well, yeah.
But if you, Larry and I went to Joggins, and that's the spot where you can actually see this tilting of strata.
Yeah, you see it in a lot of places, but that must have been something to see.
And so you can also see that during the initial stages of the flood, there would have been a lot of these layers laying down and being, you have beds of this stuff turning to rock because you have the pressure of the, of the water on top of it. And it settles down.
We saw that in Mount St. Helens, sort of a little mini laboratory.
Right, yeah.
The water runs across that and put a lot of strata and sediment there, and then the pressure pushed a lot of the lithified basically a lot of the sediment. It's interesting, even in the major areas, you can see a lot of areas where the clays and silts are still kind of clay, what's the word I'm looking for? They scumble up. They're kind of friable, I guess is what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. They're not all rock, but out west they are. But anyway, so that's not really that big of an issue. Okay, Doug, what about number too. This is something when you read to me, I'd not really heard this before or thought about it. What is this, the one about the mercury from the volcanism?
Well, this chapter is called mercury toxicity.
Yeah, okay.
In the Genesis flood. And this is an issue that was brought up by a geophysicist. His name is Glenn Morton.
Okay.
And he argued that a dangerous concentration of the toxic metal mercury would have been released by the Genesis flood.
Okay.
And his idea on this was that it would have been the 90% of the mercury that would have been released. It would have been released as dissolved mercury ions, and that would have been enough, according to him, to pollute the water.
Poison the oceans.
Poison the oceans.
In the water.
I never heard this before.
Yeah.
It
was new to me.
I wonder why. And really, the chemistry. There's a fellow who wrote this chapter. His name is Aaron Hutchinson. He's got his PhD in chemistry, and he goes through this and just simply refutes this argument one by one, and says the whole chemistry of the whole situation doesn't warrant the conclusions that they make.
So why does he say that? I mean, because we know that volcanism does provide. I mean, gases and stuff get. The water does get toxic. At least in regional areas. Shoot, didn't they have one Dante's Peak or something? They had a bunch of volcano movies a bunch of years back, but and they talk about you can tell how the waters are getting poisoned, and then of course the air. So why does he say that's not a problem? In a nutshell, can you get there? Can you get there?
Well, one of the
easy?
things is that mercury forms a very good bond with sulfur, and if you release mercury into the in a volcanic
environment, yeah,
it will combine with to form mercury sulfide, and mercury sulfide is very insoluble in water. It just settles out as a rock.
Oh, really?
And so,
Okay.
The primary way that you get mercury, mine mercury, is from a mineral called cinnabar.
Okay.
That is, and so it's a rock, and you have to extract it out of this rock to get the cinnabar. And mine the cinnabar to get the
mercury
out of it.
Right. So, in volcanism or volcanoes, is this rock or this mineral called cinnabar where you get mercury out of? Is there a lot of that in volcanic activity? Or I'm not that familiar with how mercury works.
Well, the idea was that during volcano it sort of heat the rocks up and it would release the mercury.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Now, the poisonous part of mercury is if it combines with organic compounds like methyl mercury. Methyl mercury is highly toxic, and that's the dangerous stuff that you get in the polluting the waters.
Okay.
And that's formed by somewhat of a different process.
Well, would any of that have happened maybe with all the dead animal and plant material?
What he does in this article was that he goes in and makes the assumptions. Well, let's suppose that you actually got some of this stuff. He says that the concentrations of that kind of mercury would never reach the point.
Oh, I see.
Actually, that toxic too.
So it would have been diluted out so much. Okay, all right, okay.
Now, if you take for an example, most of the fillings in your teeth are mercury amalgams.
Right.
And they're alloys of mercury with some other metals. And,
right. We're talking about the silver, not the gold.
We have potential mercury poisoning sitting in our own dental.
Is that what's going on?
And you remember Mad Hatter disease?
Well, yeah, that was from the chemicals they would use to treat and create hats. Yeah.
Yeah, Mad Hatter was because of the mercury.
Yeah, mercury, and yeah.
That was. If you want to find out a little bit more about this issue, and if you stumble over the idea that Noah's flood couldn't have happened because of too much mercury in the water.
It's a good
Well,
book.
Here's an answer to that.
Called Rock Solid Answers by Michael Ord and
Rock solid answers. There's about
who's the other guy?
pages
Yeah.
of pretty heavy-duty chemistry if you want to go into it.
Wow. Okay.
So the third one has to do with the formation of caves.
You know, Doug, when you talked about this, I guess I never thought about it much because I just figured caves were either they formed before the flood, probably got destroyed, or they were remnants of the fountains in the deep broken up, or they're post-flood action where more soluble material was eroded away fairly quickly. I never really thought that as much of a problem. Besides, how are you going to know?
Well, it's not much of a problem
Yeah.
anyway, but
Okay.
Emil Silvestru is the
He's the cave guy, yeah. We met him down at Biloxi that one year.
Yeah,
Cool guy, yeah.
And so he spent a lot of his time going into caves.
Yeah, he's Romanian, right? Isn't he from Romania? Yeah, yeah.
And so the thing that's interesting about this is that the argument against the flood model has to do with, well, it takes millions of years for all these formations in the caves to accumulate.
Oh, that old saw. Okay.
And so he goes into the fact that you can go into many of the caves in, like Carlsbad caverns,
Right.
and you can actually see the growth of these formations far exceeded that of what they.
Yeah, and these caves they're not dead caves if they're actually able to form things, but they're very slow. There's not a lot of water action. To me, you know, Doug, over the years we've talked about that. Well, they fossilized hats and nails and boots and, you know, and water, the fossils, if you will, stalactites at the edges of bridges. Big long ones that have formed within the, you know, at most a few decades. Some of them within as short as just 10 or 20 years. Pretty good size stalactite and stalagmite type
Yeah,
formations.
you find them in mines and
Mines.
under bridges, even under the Lincoln Memorial. You can see stalactites.
Stalactites and stalagmites, by the way, stalactites, stalac C for ceiling, stalag G for ground. That's how you tell which one's from the one up, and of course when they meet, they're columns. But the fact is those things can form very quickly, and or relatively speaking, you do not need millions of years. What you need is water and a cementing agent, you know, and that's what you need. Okay.
But what this article goes into is, I think he believes that much of this karst formation, which would be caves, would have been as a result of the flood of Noah.
Really? Okay.
It would have been a separation between different layers.
Oh.
You know, as the layers settled down, and you have.
As it began pressured and it began to be dried out, it would have split. Certain things would have split apart. Okay.
Yeah, and you would have had trapped water in limestone, and the limestone sort of. And a typical example of this would be the formation in Florida.
Which one's that one?
Well, there's a whole cave system underneath.
Is that right?
Entire aquifer that's in Florida.
Okay.
And we're getting to the point where they're using a lot of the water on the surface, and they drill holes into the aquifer and water the lawns and do stuff like that.
Oh yeah, okay.
And use it for agriculture and everything like that. And they're getting some sinkholes.
Yeah, that I've read about. Yeah, some big ones. We've lost houses and cars and people.
It's kind of a problem in Florida, and a little bit scary, you know, if you're sleeping at night and this guy gets
Swallowed up whole by a big sinkhole. I know. I was reading the most recent one I heard about was it seemed like it was just a year or two ago, you know, but.
And we went to Silver Springs, and that's a nice example of the cave system that's just filled with water. Now, you don't have much in the way of caves because they're all water filled as part of.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
But
Which may have been what it was like right at the time of the flood. A lot of these caves,
yeah.
but over time, the water is either leached out or drained out or filtered through other weaknesses or areas, and hence we have caves now.
No, they're
in a lot of
actually
those.
discovering a lot of new caves lately, and there's one that he describes as the most beautiful cave in the world, and it's called Geer Cave or something like that, and it's right near Carlsbad Caverns.
Really?
And it's
I never heard of this.
one of the deepest caves in the world, and it's also one of the most beautiful. They just have been trying to explore the extent of it, and they haven't been able to actually figure out how big this cave
How
is.
close to Carlsbad is it?
It's just I guess a few miles away.
Is it not connect? Is it connected to Carlsbad, or is it totally different?
Well, it's hard to tell.
You don't know yet.
if it
Okay.
is, but it's supposed to be a huge, deep cave, and it's supposed to be one of the most beautiful with all these formations in it.
Oh, we love those. Yeah.
Remember, you and I went to Karshner Caverns there in Arizona. Now,
Yeah.
That was a pretty cool thing, and that's something that they've just discovered. I think it was like in 1974 when they first discovered it, and then just recently they've opened up this new visitor center there with the state park.
Yeah.
And so last time we went down there, we were able to visit that place, and it's really a pretty neat place.
I love caves anyway. I love going into them. Yeah, spelunking. Yeah. Although I gotta imagine it seemed like it would be when you're first doing caves exploring, there's a little headlight on there going through some of those claustrophobic places. If you are claustrophobic, you don't want to go in them. Yeah, because it's dark. You don't know where you are, and if you get lost, wow, you'll never get out. But even so, but when you get in there, you see ribbons, you see what do they call this bacon and all the different kinds of bacon and eggs, and they have these nicknames. The caves because the minerals that are into these things, Doug, are so wonderful. They have depending on what kind of whether they got copper or iron or they got yellowish. But I mean, you get all kinds of colors. And what stuff they call it? It's all frilly and scrilly. It's all like curly Q stuff. There's lace or no. I can't think of the name of it. I love that stuff. It's very, very, very beautiful stuff. Usually they're fairly small.
Yeah, it sort of comes out like this.
Yep, and it curls up
curls around and
it's just wonderful. And the colors, some of them are, you get reds and yellows and, I mean, caves are just fascinating and no matter what you do, but
one of the favorite caves I've been in is Lurie Caverns, and
love that place, yeah.
and
Did you go out on the boat? Did you go out on the boat on that one?
I think I did.
The glass
That was
bottom boat?
many years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah.
in 1970. In the 1970s, we visited
Yeah.
that place. But Lurie Caverns is just fascinating because, of course, I'm somewhat of a musician, not to speak of. But,
Well, hey,
but but they have a musical instrument in this.
Yeah.
In the Lurie Caverns called the stalactite organ. And what they've done is that they've found that if you hit the stalactites with a hammer, so they have sort of a ring to them.
Right.
And so they've got a number of them that they've filed a little bit so that when it rings, it actually has a true note.
Okay.
And so they've hooked up hammers all throughout the cave system
Yeah.
on these stalactites.
And they play.
And they've got this organ console, and you can play these stalactipes with this organ.
Stalactipes. I love it. Dun, 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 dun. Phantom of the Opera, man.
It's not like that at all. It is sort of very ethereal.
Is it really?
Kind of course, it echoes throughout the cavern.
Right. Okay.
And, it's gone a number of, it actually goes for several miles. It's actually the largest musical instrument in the world because of its size. because these things are going way over here, way over here.
That's amazing.
And it's just a really interesting thing. Anyway, it's getting to the point where these arguments are really ringing hollow against the Genesis flood. Now, we really don't have answers for everything. We can't go back and actually observe what the...
Doug, it's the thing that I've said, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I always tell people, I said, look, if there is a reasonable answer, then why don't we be reasonable? Unless you have an agenda to disbelieve, it's written as credible history, and all your objections can be answered. But we can't prove that the answer we have is the answer, because we can't go back in a time machine, like you said, and go and see. But we do have reasonable facsimiles, and it's how, and what to me is amazing, Doug, not only is the explanatory power of the creation model and the creation flood model good, but its prediction is very good. I mean, I still remember years ago, when we started talking about the fountains of the deep breaking up, we should find remnants of these fountains, and guess what? They're finding water pockets way, way below where they think water could actually seep into, and they're highly saline, salt water. There's a bunch of these broken up chambers, very, very deep down there. Probably some of those caves they're discovering. There's so many things that the Mount St. Helens showed that that strata can be formed very quickly. We've seen one thing after another has shown you that the predictive scenarios of the flood model been very good, as well as the explanatory power. And we're not doing
it makes also sense for professional geologists to utilize creation geology in their work to find oil and
good. Yes, exactly right.
But they refuse to do that. And I think it sets back the science quite a bit.
Quite a bit. Yes, it does.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our show tonight. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.